Okay, grade 11. Welcome from Eco Park. I'm glad to have a chat to you again. It's been 7 days, a long time, so I'm missing you, and I hope that you're missing me, etc., etc. You may notice that I've got a tie on because somebody complained that, Mr. Christopher, why is it that you're not wearing your tie? You're the only teacher in Chuvanan who wears a tie, so why is it that you're not wearing a tie when you're talking to us? So I said, well, I don't want to have a problem here, so I better wear my tie. So you should be proud of me for that. You can see as well that we are now having a new platform for, dealing with these videos and homework, etc., etc. I'm not too sure how this is going to work. I'm going to continue to put, work on Google Classroom and giving marks and comments, etc., etc. And maybe as time goes on, I will understand it a little bit more. I'm registered now, and I've got the hang of it a little bit, but it doesn't seem to be very clear, and certainly not clear as to why we need it at the moment. But obviously, there must be some trick in Microsoft Office 365 that I don't know about, and for that reason, uh, they obviously understand it more than I, and they think that it's useful for Chuvanan. So I'm going to be putting the work on Chuvanan and on Google Classroom as well as on Office 365. You may notice, and I'm hoping that you're going to notice this, is that the microphone should be better. I think I said to you a couple of weeks ago that I went out and bought a microphone from Hanoi Computer Shop, and I was really proud of myself. But then suddenly I noticed that there was no microphone jack. And in fact, most laptops don't have a microphone jack. They have a headphone jack, but they don't have a microphone jack. So I didn't know what to do, and I had to sort of work it out. And there are these little attachments that you can get. It wasn't very expensive, about 16,000 dong, and it's like one of these jacks that it has a two-pronged jack where you can either put the headphone or the microphone. So I'm doing that at the moment, and hopefully my audio problems will be finished. You may have also heard through the grapevine that Cambridge is no longer going to be writing the exam for the AS exam for this June, which is a big surprise, but I suppose not a surprise given the seriousness of what's happening at the moment in the world. They say, because I've been listening to their speeches online, that they're trying to protect the safety and life of the students and the teachers. So for that reason, this year is a very special year, and they will be having to deal with university applications without the normal A level or AS level exams. Now we're doing the AS level paper, and so what they have decided is that I will be looking up the evidence of work, and I have to show evidence that students have done work and that it has been assessed and marked and commented on, etc., etc. And that with that, I will be the judge as to whether you did well or didn't do well in the AS program. And I've had you now for over a year, so I think I know you really, really well. You all well, and I know those who are serious in economics and those who couldn't care less and are just here for a bit of fun. And those students who are not really interested in economics, you don't need to be a rocket scientist to realize that I'm not going to be giving grades for students who haven't done anything at all. So keeping that in mind, I would suggest that you do your homework, you produce valid and useful work that shows, that illustrates to me that you are thinking. Most of the students are doing a good job. I think this past week it was 12 out of 17, which was good. Grade 10, I'll be honest with you, is 21 out of 21. So how do you get around that one? That the grade 10s are more sort of hardworking and enthusiastic than you guys, you know? And the quality of their work is fantastic, really. I mean, with graphs and it's very neatly done, and it's fantastic. I mean, it's inspiring to work with the grade 10s. So, keeping that in mind, I think that we should just go on to the various questions that we have for this week. So there was a couple of issues that I wanted to bring up as well. There was a little bit of a problem with plagiarism, and I hope you know what plagiarism is. Students who just copy and paste, they're just Googling a topic saying, okay, well, what's Monopoly all about? And they just Google what is Monopoly all about, and then they just copy paste and they're hoping for a great mark. Well, I'll give you a little bit of a warning that at university, they will kick you out of university if you try that even once. And stealing work, which is what it is, stealing, is not at all accepted. They have very sophisticated ways now to determine whether something is yours or not yours. The idea is for you to read something. I'm not expecting you to come up with the material from heaven, but you're supposed to read the material, think about it, and then write it in your own words. And I'm not expecting you to be a super fantastic writer in English, but it should be, you know, clear and coherent so that I can understand what you have to say. And I'll give you a fair mark if it actually belongs to you. But I notice at least 5 times that things were totally lifted straight from the textbook. And you must think I'm a Dumbo if you think that I'm not going to notice that. So keep that in mind, and people's marks reflected the fact that when things are not your own, you don't really deserve to receive the marks. Okay, there were, let me see, one of the questions was asked was, somebody said that they did not understand monopsony. Okay, that's a valid point. I think I gave you, on the handout, the Monopoly handout, I gave you a little bit of a rundown, and I think I've given you the example even in the classroom about Hershey's chocolates. And they actually, they choose a location in the United States, actually in Pennsylvania, a state called Pennsylvania, whereas in the middle of absolutely nowhere, where there's a population of people who just don't have any alternatives for employment. And by doing so, you're able to lower the cost of labor. And so this is a good example of a monopsony, when there is only one buyer of labor, one buyer, and there's lots of sellers. So we call that a monopsony. And of course, it's a reflection that Hershey's chocolates are trying to lower the cost of labor to such a low point that they can make a lot of profit. And it's not a happy situation, but that is a reality, and it's one of the dangers of any form of monopoly, that you have incredible monopoly power. And in this case, you know, you've got a monopoly power in the cost of labor. Like, you're the only guy, or you're the only person who is able to offer, you know, jobs to, you know, rural people living in the countryside in Pennsylvania and the United States. And so they're probably paying everybody minimum wage, which in the United States is terrible. It's $7.50, I think it is, the minimum wage, which you know you can't even live in a hole in the ground for $7.50 an hour in the United States, because things are so expensive and you don't get health care and all those other things. And so life is very tough. You live in absolute poverty if you're living on the minimum wage. And so Hershey's not that concerned about that. They're concerned about maximizing their profits. They have to answer to their shareholders. The shareholders are not that interested in the welfare of the workers of Hershey's chocolate bars factory. and therefore they're going to push it right to the limit. And they'll say, well, we're not going to accept a trade union, and if you bring in a trade union, we will not locate our factory here. And people are really desperate for jobs because there is no alternative for them. So this is really what a monopsony is all about. So there's one buyer and there's many sellers. Is there anything else? I don't think so. I think that's about it. We got a couple of Skype calls from grade 11s. I had one Skype call for over an hour, and that's nice because obviously I reconnect with you, and it's always nice to see your face and have a chat and to answer any questions that you have. But also it should be helpful for you as well, because you can get kind of an instant response to maybe, built up questions like, this person had about 10 questions up his sleeve. So obviously, many of you may be storing up questions that you're too shy to ask, and therefore you just do it all in one Skype, which is okay. And don't be shy, relax, and there's no one going to criticize you, no matter what the question is. So you just feel relaxed and contact me by my password, my Skype password, which is Christopher.Scoggins, and you will find me very quickly. Okay, so within about a couple of hours, I should be able to reconnect with you, and we can have a good chat. Okay, so today, if you look at your handout, you can see that it's all about perfect competition, and we have a super duper graph on the top, which is the graph you got to remember. Just like last week, you had a monopoly graph, which you really need to remember that monopoly graph, because that is the graph for the monopoly graph. If you're talking about monopolies, stick that graph in. If you're talking about perfect competition, you stick this graph in. Okay, try to memorize this, how to draw this graph correctly. And you're going to get bonus marks. And as I say, you shouldn't be fighting for a pass mark. You should be trying to get an A star or an A or whatever, so that you do well and you are able to get into the college that you want to, or get the job that you want to, because you've got good marks. Okay, it starts off just by defining perfect competition, and I hope that all of you already know what that is. Okay, it's a theoretical market structure that has many buyers and sellers, identical or homogeneous products, no barriers to entry, and perfect information. So right away, we know that this is kind of a ridiculous business structure because it's so theoretical. The idea of any firm having perfect information to know what the demands of the consumers are and how much are they willing to buy at every level of, at every price point is quite ridiculous, and to, have a situation where there are no barriers to entry at all, even like a farm, which is the most common example of perfect competition. I mean, usually there's a bit of barriers to entry just in the cost of starting up a farm. But I suppose if you had a couple of pigs, you remember the story I told you about what was the fecundity, fecundity time for a sow, which is a female pig, which was 3 months, 3 weeks, and 3 days, this is where this little quotation, fits nicely into the narrative here. You're obviously able to get into business and out of business really quickly. In only 3 months, 3 weeks, and 3 days, you can get yourself into business because you got yourself some pigs, and you can get out of the pig business really quickly by killing the pigs. And so for that reason, that would be, one of the better examples of, virtually no barriers to entry, and it's very quick to get in and very quick to get out. Homogeneous products is kind of rare, but it's not so rare. Like I always use the example of potatoes, where a potato is the same as another potato. It could be something else, like an airline ticket. It could be, something that you buy, like a share from Microsoft. I mean, no matter where you buy that share from, it's a clearly a situation where you have to you have no choice but to buy the same share. So if you buy it from company A or you buy it from company B, it's the same share. So this is what we're talking about, really. And we talk a little bit about how this kind of theoretical idea is an unattainable goal. Okay, I apologize for that little break. Basically, we're discussing some of the characteristics of perfect competition, and one of the things I was saying to you that is one of these unattainable sort of models of business structure, and it's something that is the dream of most free market economists because they see this as an example of what they refer to as Pareto optimality. You might want to look that one up, where they somehow believe that it's like their little heaven where you don't need anything other than the free market to stabilize the economy, and that the economy is super efficient, and you don't need to have things like minimum wages or trade union power or anything like that. Everybody works hard. Everybody makes normal profit. Everybody works efficiently, both productively and allocatively. And for that reason, perfect competition is an ideal system. But of course, it exists in almost nothing. Okay, agriculture and the stock market are the two examples where really perfect information is kind of the reality. I mean, if you wanted to know exactly what price existed for every single stock and their changes in their price, you could buy a very inexpensive app on your computer and you could have all the prices going across your monitor on a minute by minute basis. And that provides a certain amount of perfect information, and that really everybody has the same opportunity to buy and sell, and there are no interferences in the market. And that's kind of true with agriculture, although agriculture is changing and it is becoming a little bit more monopoly directed. I mean, many farms do have a bit of monopoly power. And in fact, the farmers try to create a bit of monopoly power by putting in a bit of value added. And I always give the example of potatoes, where you can clean the potatoes, or you can turn them into potato powder, or you can deliver the potatoes or something to increase the value of those potatoes. So even agriculture is slowly moving away from this kind of idealized model of perfect competition. The reality for anybody in that situation, if you're a seller, is a disaster, because of course you're a total what they call a price taker. You have no control over the price, mostly because your domination of the market is really, really small. Maybe you have 1% of the market, and you've got lots of millions of other players in the market, and therefore you could never kind of get together with a couple of your buddies to somehow stop production and thereby pushing up the prices to create an artificial shortage. It just couldn't happen. And so for that reason, you are going to be a price taker forever. I think I gave the example in the handout about Russia and South Africa. Here it is here. South Africa and Russia are good examples of countries who dominate the gold market and regularly collude to reduce production and push up the price. They are price makers and are not working in a perfectly competitive market. So they understood, because there is not that many gold producers. Canada is a gold producer, but not in the big way that South Africa or Russia is. And therefore, they have probably a monopoly in the production of gold, and therefore they can kind of create this almost like a cartel, where they're creating this seller's monopoly, you might say, where you can kind of control the production in order to change the price in your interest. And so clearly this would be kind of a counterfoil, an opposite example of what we're talking about in perfect competition. Because in perfect competition, you will never have a situation where you have any form of power at all. And that's why farmers are really a good example. I mean, in many countries, particularly in the West, agriculture is becoming a smaller and smaller piece of the gross domestic product. In fact, in Canada, I'm told it's about 5%. It's only France in Europe that actually has a majority in agriculture. I'm not too sure historically why that is, but most people in France are somehow related to the rural economy, whether you're a farmer, but you might be selling tractors, or you're buying seeds or fertilizer or something like that related to the agricultural community. So for that reason, they would be a country that has to worry about this. But for a lot of countries like Canada, there's not that many people involved in agriculture, and therefore, a lot of people don't need to worry about it. The sad reality for many people who live in less developed countries, and I don't include Vietnam in this, but I've lived most of my life in less developed countries, 10 years in Africa. And the first thing you notice is that most farmers are poor, because their products are homogeneous, because they're not really able to get any sort of extra value added to their product. They will always make a normal profit. And sometimes they make a loss because they just can't keep up with a lot of the large corporate farms that are starting up. I remember when I was doing my master's degree, I went to Kenya to do some research, and I was doing a master's thesis on the economic efficiency of drip irrigation systems in banana plantations in Kenya, East Africa. That was the title. What a title. And one of the things I noticed right away was that most of the farmers, the local farmers, had about 1 hectare, which is about 2.4 acres. So they had a very small holding. But you had a lot of big companies, often American companies like the Dole. I particularly remember the Dole Pineapple Corporation had these huge farms of hundreds of thousands of hectares in Kenya, where they were growing pineapples, and they were canning the pineapples, and they were distributing the cans of pineapples all over the world. Probably even if you went into a supermarket in City Mart here in Hanoi, you could probably buy a can of Dole sliced pineapples. Even though Vietnam actually sells delicious, inexpensive, fresh pineapples, you actually can buy canned pineapples here in Vietnam. And that is basically what the competition has become, where the only way really to make any money is to sort of do it in a really, really big way, and from a corporate way, and to try to cater to the demand of Western consumers who want everything in a can. They don't care if the pineapple is in season. They want to have a pineapple bits for their dessert 12 months of the year. So by providing these canned pineapples, then you're able to make a little bit of an extra profit. So you're able to make super normal profits. But normally, agriculture in less developed countries is a recipe for poverty. And that's why people are trying to get out of the rural communities, and they want to move into the cities because they think that people's lives are better in the cities. I gave the example also about the reasons for the homogeneousness, and I said to you, because Farmer Huang's potatoes are identical to Farmer Duong's potatoes, and this makes it almost impossible to advertise their products, and the prices will always be at the equilibrium point for the whole industry. Some economists argue that this is the main cause for most farmers in the world to be living with a low income. Now, in theory, the perfect competitive firm also allows total freedom of entry and exit. But in reality, the high startup costs of opening a new farm would be possibly it would be a restriction, particularly for the poor producers or people who just want to get into some business so they can avoid starvation, really, you know. In most countries outside of the industrialized West, however, agricultural businesses are in the majority and are dominated by very small and numerous farms. This is historically true in the West as well, in Canada as well. I mean, 100 years ago, or certainly 150 years ago, everybody, all my ancestors would have been farmers. And in fact, my family name Scoggins is actually the Swedish word. Okay, sorry about that again. The video broke up. I think, in fact, my computer was a bit sort of overwhelmed that I had to sort of remove a lot of films and videos, etc., off my laptop because it was too full. What I was saying before I was so rudely interrupted by the computer is that my family name is actually the Swedish word for a woodcutter. So you can see that you know, a long time ago we were all basically working on the land. You might have been a farmer or a woodcutter or you know doing something in the primary sector, and all of those jobs were essentially in perfect competition, and they were very homogeneous. I mean, one woodcutter probably was the same as the other woodcutter, just like one farmer is the same as the other farmer. And for that reason, people lived in poverty, and that's why they moved to other countries. They ended up emigrating for a better life, and maybe they wanted to be more urbanized and live in the city, and they wanted to maybe work in the service sector or maybe in the secondary sector in factories, for example, after the Industrial Revolution. So for that reason, you know, it was considered very undesirable to be in a state of perfect competition. You know, you made normal profits. Managers will often fire you if you know you're not able to lead them into a certain period of supernormal profits. That's why they hire you, not because they like your face, but because they want you to somehow innovate or do something, you know, with value added to the product so that eventually you will be able to make super normal profits for the owner. Okay. And I say on in the paper there, for the consumer, however, perfectly competitive markets are ideal as the prices are very low and due to the high number of actors in the market, it's extremely competitive. So we call that consumer sovereignty when you know you're able to get a lot of the benefits of consumption, you know, in the marketplace. And so clearly, a lot of people were working really, really hard to produce and to make some sort of profit. But it was really the only people who were really benefiting were the buyers, those who actually had the money. If you look a little bit lower down in the final paragraph there, um, it talks about the demand curve facing the perfectly competitive firm is therefore perfectly elastic at this price. That would be true. If the firm sells an extra unit of output, it will get the same price as the one before because there is no change, you know. You know, you're not getting any discount for economies of scale or anything like that. The marginal revenue is therefore equal to the price or to the average revenue. So demand is equal to average revenue and to marginal revenue. It's a very tough environment. And although a lot of monitors think that that would be great because if you have money, your life is wonderful because everybody is kissing your feet because everybody is trying to fight for you know a certain the very limited market that the limited number of buyers. So if you're a buyer, you're doing really, really well. Assuming that the perfectly competitive firm is a profit maximizer, then the firm will produce where MC is equal to MR. That's true, and you can see that on the monopoly graph where the two slopes where the MC is equal to MR. That's where they produce that. And this is how you can see that a monopoly is actually very detrimental to the consumers, because they're not going to stop at MC is equal to MR. They're going to go all the way to the demand curve and then across to the y-axis, and therefore they can charge a lot more for their products than if they were in a perfectly competitive environment. Okay, we got some kind of unusual questions this time. I've got some short questions, essay questions, and multiple choice, so that should be kind of fun, I suppose. So the short questions, and you could just basically have maybe 2 sentences for this. If you are a perfectly competitive farmer, what would happen to prices if there is a bumper crop, which means that the weather is wonderful and you get a much higher production than usual? What would happen in a bumper crop due to perfect weather? And number 2, to your profits if the price of fertilizer increases significantly. So how would you respond? Let's say you were a perfectly competitive farmer. What would happen in those 2 situations? Typical essay question. I kind of looked it up in the book about past exam papers, Cambridge exam papers, and about a question for perfect competition. And I found this one. Discuss the view that perfect competition is a more desirable business structure than a monopoly. In your answer, make reference to productive and allocative efficiency. That should be fairly easy. You should be able to explain, why a lot of economists believe that perfect competition is by far a better reflection of a market without market failures, etc., etc. Certainly, if you're a monetist, you believe that perfect competition would be what you're really trying to aspire to, really. So for that reason, that question should be easy. And then the 5 final ones are multiple choice. And so I wanted to stick in a multiple choice because you do have a multiple choice test paper, and I wanted you to sort of practice a little bit on those questions. So that's it for now. I apologize for 3 bits of a film, but hopefully you're able to follow the continuation of the 3 films. You're able to stick it in together, and your mind is not distracted too much. Keep in mind that this is still a dangerous time all over the world, so make sure that you wear a surgical mask, and make sure that you wash your hands about 10 times a day, and that you keep your distance from all your buddies. Communicate through Skype or Messenger, or stay home. Your ancestors and Ho Chi Minh, they sacrifice more than anybody can imagine, and all they are asking us is to stay at home. So do that for your teachers, do that for the doctors and the nurses in the hospitals who are overwhelmed with patients who have the virus. And you should be proud of the fact that Vietnam is probably the only country in the world now that has had no deaths from the virus. And we should all continue this so that we can all end up being healthy and happy at the end of this virus period. So bye-bye for now, and I'll speak to you again next week. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.